Hello, my name is Gary Gomes. I'm here to talk with you about Vedic astrology and other matters connected with the world of the stars and the heavens. And I want to ask if people could give me feedback on my attire, because I want to know if the more casual look is a good idea. Should I come in a suit? I know I need a haircut. And actually, this has an astrological point to it. This is my not so subtle way of talking about a concept in astrology called Arudha or Pada, P-A-D-A, A-R-U-D-H-A. Arudha or Padas are essentially, and this is a special request, so I'm just giving a call out. Arudhas or Padas are essentially, they're essentially a concept in the chart. So essentially what happens in a chart is, the way a chart's constructed, you'll have a regular astrology chart constructed, and let's say you have the sign Aries. Well, Aries' lord is Mars, so let's say Aries is in Taurus. The Pada of the first house, or the Arudha of the first house, is called the Arudha Lagna. That's a very important part of astrology, because this acts almost like another ascendant sun or moon in the chart. It's another really powerful point. And they're calculated mainly by counting the number of signs that the lord of the sign is from the house itself. So let's say in that example I gave that we have an Aries rising sign. Aries is the first sign in the zodiac, as I'm sure you know. Aries is the first sign. The lord of Aries is in Taurus. If we were to take the principle of Padas or Arudhas, we would count 1, 2 from Aries to Taurus. That would give us Taurus being the house in which the Pada sits, or the Pada Lord sits, and we would count another 1 sign away, or another 2 signs away, to Gemini, because in Vedic astrology they include the first house in the counting. So 7 signs away is literally 7 signs away, so it's really 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 5 signs away is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So essentially the Pada of the first house for this Aries Lagna person that I mentioned is going to be in the sign Gemini. That's going to be important not only in terms of the way the person presents themselves to the world, is their image, in other words. But I have a problem with using Pada or Arudha synonymously with image, and I'll explain why in a second. But that's going to be how they present themselves to the world. So they'll be very talkative, they'll be very aggressive, they'll be very ambitious, they'll be very communicative. If the first Lord Pada is in the 3rd house, it gives another way of examining the chart. So essentially, and one of the reasons I have difficulty using this as an image is because essentially the entire chart is an image. I'll stay on this side topic only for a couple of minutes, because I have quite a bit to cover with the Arudhas. So essentially, or with the Padas. So essentially what happens is, some astrologers that I know say, well, this is the image of the person. So if the person is, let's say, in Aries Lagna, if the Arudha Lagna or the Pada of the first house sits in the 6th house, they'll act like a Virgo. They'll seem to be very much like a Virgo rising. If the Pada of sits in the 8th house, they'll seem like a Sagittarius rising. The problem with that is that Padas and Arudhas are not really representations, they're actual manifestations. There's a famous story about Maitreya talking to his disciple and saying, or Maitreya speaking with his guru, and the guru says to him, and there's a strong tradition of Maya in the Hindu tradition, in the Sanatana Dharma. And Maya is essentially, the idea is that this world we sit in, even though it's real and we can feel it, and I've discussed this before, is really an illusion. It's really not permanent. It definitely doesn't last. Everything that's born dies. Everything that comes into existence goes away. Even mountain peaks go away eventually over time. So this is not an alien concept, but the pada is more of a representation of where the first house's energies go or move. And they're used extensively in what's called Jaimini astrology, which is a different system of astrology than Vimshotri, although it's related. And essentially the padas represent certain elements in life. So the pada for the 7th house and the 12th house are going to represent marriage. The padas for the 5th house and the 9th house are going to represent children and higher education, for example. So I can remember when I went back to get my doctoral degree, I was going back during a pada of the 9th house. I was in a major planetary period which had absolutely nothing to do with higher education, absolutely zero to do with higher education. But it did have to do with giving up things and going on to different pathways. So that was how it was explained. I looked at the pada and said, okay, that makes sense. I'm going back for my doctoral degree during this Mahadasha because it's connected with this pada. And when I looked at the charadashas or the sign dashas, it fit even better. Now, so sometimes in astrology, we'll look at the chart, and if you have a knowledge of astrology, you look and say, well, where's the astrologer getting this from? I'm nowhere near my a pada connected with marriage, but I'm getting married. And sometimes the karaka for marriage will show up. Sometimes the pada for marriage will show up during those dashas. The other thing is, if you have but the calculation of padas is really interesting, and there's one exception to calculating the padas, and it's a very important exception. I was asked in particular, so every single planet in astrology, especially in Jaimini astrology, has a ruler and a co-ruler. No, I'm sorry, every single planet has a ruler. Yeah, every single sign has a ruler. So Sun rules Leo, Cancer is ruled by Moon. But when you get to Mars, and when you get to Scorpio and Aquarius, they have what are called co-rulers, especially in Jaimini astrology. And those co-rulers are used to count Mahadasha lengths or major planetary period lengths in Vedic astrology. They can also be used to calculate padas. And essentially what happens is, but you always calculate padas forward. So you always go clockwise through the chart. You always go zodiacally through the chart. You never go backwards. There's no book, there's no text, there's no classical work that says you count the padas backwards. So that's one thing to get straight off right away. Also, if Ketu occupies Scorpio and Mars occupies another sign, because Ketu is a co-lord of Scorpio, you go to where Mars is in the chart to calculate where the pada should be. So instead of going to Ketu, if Ketu is with other planets, and so if Ketu is in Scorpio, regardless, you go to where Mars is. If Ketu and Mars are both in one sign, you go to the sign that has more planets in it. Okay, so essentially, you would go to. So let's say Ketu has 2 planets with it. except when it's in Scorpio, in which case you automatically go to Mars. Let's say Ketu has 2 other planets in it. You're kind of stuck if Mars has 2 other planets in it. But if you look at the sign, you see essentially which planet is higher in degree or more powerful in the sign with Ketu. Then you count from Ketu. If you see a planet has a higher degree sign than Mars, you count from Mars. The same is true with Rahu and Saturn. So if you see Rahu in Aquarius, you don't count from Rahu for the Padas, or you don't count from Aquarius for the Padas. You count to where Saturn is placed in the chart, and then you count the number of signs from that. So essentially, when you use these things, these are really powerful tools for subtle chart analyses. And they're very, very useful predictive tools as well. So you can actually look at Padas, you can actually look at Mahadashas, but they really should be only used for sign Mahadasha purposes. They can be used for analyzing a chart. That's perfectly fine. But, and you can also look at the Mahadasha of a really powerful planet, like Ketu was a planet in which I went back and got my doctoral degree. That was a Mahadasha. But I was also going through a Cancer Mahadasha at the same time. My case was located in Cancer. So the sign Cancer became really, really strong and really, really prominent at that particular point in time. But when you're looking at Padas, you're looking at Padas to show the results of the house. You're now looking for a Pada to show the image of the house. You're now looking for it to show the personality. You're not looking for it to show the public image. You're looking at it as another interpretational tool, and you'll be astonished at how well it works that way. If you're looking for image, that's fine, you can do that. I'm not disagreeing with anybody else's methodology here. I just like to take as few steps as I can to reach a point. And I've noticed in astrology in particular, and I've mentioned this before, I think in my very first presentations, there are what I would call a lot of redundant techniques. And what I mean by redundant techniques is, essentially 2 techniques will tell you the same thing. So those are good because at least you'll get confirmation from your knowledge base based upon one of those techniques. But really, if you feel you need to go to the other technique, that's probably going a bit too far. You don't need to go to the other technique. You can look at it for confirmation, but you don't need to do that. And there are a lot of variations on the way that I just set up the Arudhas or the Padas, but basically, and I'll clarify that I think next time I talk, because this is an important part of astrology. A lot of yogas are made, or special combinations are made from the Arudhas, and they become really, really important parts of astrology if you go into in-depth chart analysis. And they also show up in the harmonic charts. So essentially, when we're talking about charts like, let's say, the Navamsha chart, the Navamsha chart is usually considered to become active after the person's entered their late 30s, early 40s. And you'll see the Arudhas changing after that particular point in time. So if you see an Arudha change, you would actually naturally look for where that chart actually look for changes in that particular area of that person's life. And sometimes you'll see quite profound changes. I do remember a person who had coming in to see me. I wish I still had his chart here. And he had a really, really outstandingly great chart. And I think I've told this story before. He had an outstanding chart. And his first part of his life, he was a literature professor at a very prestigious college. I don't want to give the name of the college out because for fear about giving away his identity, and I don't have his permission. But he was at a prestigious college, and then late 60s he dropped out of the college. He was a full professor as far as I recall, and then later on he dropped out to become a hippie, and his chart looking at the Rashi chart and the Navamsha chart was like looking at night and day, because the Rashi chart, the first chart, the birth chart, the planets were all in terrific shape. In the Navamsha chart, they were in difficult signs, or they were difficultly placed. So people's lives can change based not only on the Mahadishas, but also based upon when the Navamshas mature and when planets mature. So those are important concepts to keep in mind about Vedic astrology. Looking at the chart over the next couple of weeks, I just want to look at the world chart and see where I see some problems coming up, or some good things coming up. So give me a second. And this is the astrology software I use, is Sri Jyoti Star. You can look it up online. But there are a lot of good astrology softwares out there. There's Parashara's Light. There's Jagannath Light. There are quite a few good astrology programs out there. There's some coming out of India right now, which I'm not that familiar with, to be honest with you. But there are a lot of. Kala is another good one. Excuse me, I forgot to mention Kala. And there are others, I'm sure, that I've mentioned, and it's no offense to the people who are writing them. It's just that my memory can only hold so much. And so I'm looking at the chart right now, and I'm looking at problem areas coming through. Again, Russia is kind of a problem area. Iraq is kind of a problem area. Iraq is so much larger than Iran is. And there's some disruption coming through Turkey. It looks like some change, or some kind of disturbance in government coming in Turkey. I don't necessarily think it means there's going to be a change in administrations, but there'll certainly be some disturbance. Mars lines, I'm looking mainly at Mars, Rahu, and Saturn lines for these events. Rahu is in China, so we can see already China is experiencing some panic over the embargoes. And Mars is also passing close to Korea, so there could be some trouble in Korea and Australia, and also